And so you have millions of people out there who are disabled who kind of suddenly find that they're not able to use a gun defensively because the pistol bracelet.
I mean, they're legitimately criminals now, right?
Yeah. Well, can face up to 10 years in prison.
My
at
gosh.
least. But I mean, these will be challenged in the courts. It's just my guess is eventually they'll win. But it's still, the Biden administration.
Right.
It's just, this is just part of one of many different things that they're doing. They've been trying to put together a national gun registry. That's one reason for some of the letters that they've sent out in the past. As of the beginning of last year, they had collected almost 1 billion transactions involving guns over many decades. These guys are kind of too cute by half. The federal law was set up to try to prevent a gun registry, and they say, well, the Biden administration hasn't violated that law because even though they've have put together a computerized database of gun purchases, they haven't actually used it, and so they're not in violation of the law yet.
Wow, jeez. We also just read a story about a gun store in Montana where the IRS arrived and demanded purchase records.
Right.
Seems unconstitutional.
It's pretty hard to figure out. First of all, the warrant that they had was extremely vague, very unusual. But secondly, it's not really obvious what the IRS has to do with collecting these so-called 4473s, the records that people have for, filling out the background check information when they go and purchase a gun. Again, it seems likely that this is just part of the Biden administration's effort to go and get information on who's recently purchased a gun. Because what's happened is that when a licensed dealer goes out of business, they are required to go and turn over the records for background checks for the last 20 years. But that doesn't give the government kind of the most recent purchases that are there. And so one thing that they've done is they've sent out letters to a lot of licensed dealers asking them just to turn over recent purchase records.
Just to be nice.
And you may have heard also in recent congressional testimony that they had asked Bank of America, for example, to turn over any information that they had on gun purchases by their banking customers.
And I bet you they're doing it, aren't they?
They did do it.
Yeah. That's so bad. So bad.
Incredible.
So here, let me just. So the claim is that this helps them solve crimes to have a gun registry.
Sure.
The problem is that's simply not true. In theory, if a criminal has a gun registered to themselves and they leave the gun at the crime scene, then the gun could get traced back to the criminal and you could solve the crime. The problem is crime guns are virtually never left at the crime scene. And the few times that they are left at the crime scene, it's because the criminal's either been killed or seriously wounded. And the couple times beyond that they're left there, they're not registered. And the once or twice that the guns are registered, they're not registered to the person who committed the crime.
Plus, if we are to believe that we are finding a criminal from the crime scene of a gun from this registry, I thought they weren't using the registry.
Yeah, well, they're just setting it up so that eventually they can use it, I guess. But it's just that's the argument. And the thing is, you have Hawaii, for example, has had gun registry and licensing since 1960. They can't point to one single crime that they've been able to solve.
Wow.
But a few years ago, the Honolulu police chief estimated that just for Honolulu, it was taking about 50,000 hours worth of police time each year just to go and just to run the registry that they have there. That's 50,000 hours that could be used to do things that we know that work for police. And so, if you had 1,000 crimes that you had solved, or 100, or 50, or 12, or 3, there at least be some trade-off. But if you're losing 50,000 hours worth of police time to go and do something that they can't even point to one single crime that they've been able to solve,
Incredible.
That's 50,000 hours that could have been
wasted.
used to solve crimes.
Yeah.
It's just not Hawaii. You have similar things in D.C. or Chicago or New York or Maryland that have had registry and licensing programs.
We're speaking to John Lott from crimeresearch.org. John, let me ask you about a couple of lies we keep hearing from the Biden administration. One of them is that the American colonists couldn't own cannons. So that's in the Constitution. You couldn't own a cannon. How do you respond to that stuff? Well, in the beginning, you could own a cannon, right? Privateers, at least, were private citizens who owned cannons.
I know people today that own cannons.
Yeah.
So, look, even the Washington Post, which, is very reticent to take Biden to task, or Democrats to task anyway, on obvious lies, even they multiple times have kind of focused on that thing and just say, it's even by the Washington Post standards, that that's a ridiculous claim by the president.
Incredible.
And they don't seem to care.
Another thing they like to throw around is the universal background check. How often does that apply? I mean, almost everybody who buys a gun goes through a background check. I've never purchased a gun where I didn't go through a background check. Isn't it just if I want to sell a gun to my son or give a gun to my son, isn't that about the only purchase that doesn't go through a background check?
It depends on the state that you're in.
Okay.
There are about 20 states that require any type of private transfer of guns to
so even
have
that,
a background check.
Even that.
Right, but look, the claim often is this background checks on private transfers are brought up after you've had these mass public shootings. It was kind of Obama's favorite thing to go and point to, and Biden's raised it a lot of times. There's a problem, though. There's not one mass public shooting this century that would have been stopped if such a law had been in effect and been perfectly enforced. And I wish once in a while on some of these laws that are proposed, the media would just kind of go and ask, well, okay, you want to have this? Would it have stopped this last mass public shooting?
Yeah.
The answer would have been no. Or could you point to one over the last decade or last 2 decades that it would have stopped? Because they claim they need this for mass public shootings, even though it wouldn't have stopped any of these. But the real reason they want to have this is just to kind of fill the holes in their gun registry that we were talking about. And, they want to make sure that they have not only all the purchases that go through FFLs, but they want to make sure that they know any transfers of guns. And look, the only reason why they really want this national gun registry is to be able to take away people's guns. There's really no other benefit that the government gets from having a national gun registry. And you have situations like in Connecticut. In 2013, they passed a gun registry for many different types of guns. And they promised people, look, we're just going to use this to go and solve crimes. And of course, they can't point to any crimes that they've been able to solve. But earlier this year, the governor of Connecticut came out and said, that registry that we promised that we would never use to take people's guns away, I want to use it to take people's guns away.
Of course.
And fortunately,
how can you do that?
He wasn't able to quite get that through, despite big efforts through the Connecticut legislature. But that was what and you've seen this happen in California and New York and D.C. and Chicago, where they've set up registries and then used it to say, turn in these guns or get rid of them.
Hey, John, earlier you had addressed stabilizing braces, and clearly, Thomas Massie is great at demonstrating that his fellow lawmakers are making laws and regulations with no knowledge of what they're speaking of whatsoever. But what prompted us to reach out to you originally was when someone that watches the show, they posted a letter that the ATF sent out in respect to, I think it's the hard reset trigger situation, and it says, hey, call the ATF if, because we know that you purchased this, blah, blah, blah. So I guess my question to you is, do you know what that process is like? Like, when you call the ATF, do they end up telling you to come down there and bring the apparatus that is now unlawful to own? And is this not a Second Amendment violation of, shall not be infringed because it's not a gun per se? Where is that line there? I don't quite follow that.
Right. Well, I mean, they give you a couple options. You can either turn in the item to the ATF, or you can destroy it yourself. With pistol braces, they give you an option to be able to go and register it after you've taken it off the gun that's there. It's again, the bottom line seems to be to either use it to create a registry or to just make it difficult or impossible for certain people to be able to go and use their guns in ways to go and defend themselves and their family.
Fortunately, I've destroyed all of mine already.
That's good.
So I don't have to worry about it.
Head of the curve.
Yeah, well, I believe you.
Don't look into it too hard. Don't do a lot of investigation there. The other thing that drives me out of my mind, we mentioned the cannon thing. Biden always brings up the F-16s. First of all, can we own an F-16? If I was an American citizen who had, I don't know, $100 million,
$50 million,
could I own an F-16?
It's a little bit outside my.
Yeah, not exactly a gun. Yeah,
it has guns on it.
I mean, maybe if the guns were removed or something, I don't know. But to be honest, I don't know. I mean, there are restrictions on owning machine guns, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
but you can't own them.
Has machine guns on it.
Yeah.
So that may, you may have to go through kind of special licensing to own part of it. So.
Yeah.
And I guess finally, what can we do as American citizens to protect the Second Amendment? How should we be responding to all of the threats against it now?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of threats to it. I'll just give you one example. Biden has this zero tolerance policy for licensed dealers, where if they make one paperwork mistake, no matter how trivial, no matter how inconsequential, over the last 15 years or so, the Biden administration is taking away their license to be able to go and
make a living.
And maybe we should offer to apply this rule to government agencies. If a government agency makes one paperwork mistake, no matter how trivial, we'll put the government agency out of business. And see how Biden likes that. They could, my guess is there's probably not one government agency that would be left. But, I assume over the last 15 years, I probably have made one paperwork mistake sometime.
Yeah.
But it's just crazy stuff where they're just doing what they can to make it difficult and costly for people to be in business in the industry there.
Yeah, and difficult to be a gun owner, really. One of the backdoor things they're doing is trying to limit our access to ammo, which is a really good way of, these people who keep saying, oh, I'm a Second Amendment guy. I'm all about the Second Amendment. I just don't think people should have ammunition. Or I just don't think you should be able to have a clip that holds, 16 bullets or whatever. Nobody needs that. How do we respond to that?
Well, Biden's made many types of claims. He's said multiple times he wants to ban all semi-automatic guns. About 85% of the guns that are out there are semi-automatic guns.
Yeah.
And, the thing is, civilians benefit a lot from having semi-automatic guns. What a semi-automatic gun is you pull the trigger, one bullet comes out, it reloads itself. You pull the trigger, one bullet comes out, and so on. They're not machine guns, despite what you see on, entertainment police shows on TV. And the thing is, if you're a civilian, the reason why civilians own these guns so often is that they're very beneficial for you using a gun defensively. If you face multiple criminals, or you fire and miss, or you fire and wound but don't incapacitate the attacker, you may not have the luxury of time for manually reloading a gun. I mean, let's say we ban all semi-automatic rifles. The alternative is a rifle which you have to manually reload yourself, put another bullet in the chamber after firing a shot. And that takes time. Yeah. And when you're, as I say, you have to fire more than one shot, you may not have the luxury of time to be able to go and manually reload your gun. The notion is that somehow if we pass these types of bans, you're going to stop criminals from getting it. I just suggest people go and look at Mexico. Since 1972, Mexico has had only one gun store in the country. Only about 0.1% of the adult population legally owns a gun in Mexico, and the most powerful gun that you've been able to legally buy in Mexico is a .22 caliber short round bolt action rifle. Mexico's murder rate in many recent years has been 6 times higher than the murder rate in the United States. Drug gangs aren't using bolt action rifles to go and fight against each other. The only people that you've stopped from owning semi-automatic guns are the law-abiding Mexicans who go through the process to go and buy the guns that are there. And, you've just made it difficult for civilians to go and use guns defensively compared to, the drug cartels.
Do you hate scrolling social media for the important news stories? Well, subscribe to our newsletter. Go to theblaze.com/newsletter.